So the WBA have followed the WBC in introducing a super cruiserweight division. The WBA are calling it super cruiserweight, which is what it's been called by several organizations in the past. This is not the first time that people have tried to launch a new division between cruiserweight and heavyweight, and it was called super cruiserweight in the past, but it never took off. It never caught on, so it got ditched. But they've revived it. The WBC call their quote-unquote super cruiserweight division bridgerweight, and the WBA have gone for the old name, Super Cruiserweight. Now, the WBO have criticized this move, but just because they criticize it today, it doesn't mean they're not going to adopt it, let's say tomorrow, next year, whenever. Right? Things like this happen in boxing. I mean, I remember when Oscar De La Hoya was criticizing DAZN, saying nobody watches that, blah, blah, blah. And then a few months later, he signs with DAZN. That's how it goes in boxing. So, the WBO president, Paco Var, God, I always butcher his name, Paco Valserel, I think that's how you pronounce it, he stated, "My friends, sometimes prescriptions are worse than the disease." Amen. Having 17 divisions in professional boxing is more than enough. The junior heavyweights or cruiserweights from 175 to 200 is a fairly colorless division. Imagine another extended cruiser. The changes are not always good. Many times trying to improve, we damage the image of boxing. Those are the words of the president of the WBO, basically suggesting the WBO are not going to follow suit anytime soon. That the WBC have got the division, the WBA have got the division, the IBF and the WBO not joining at the moment. And the IBF and the WBO have had a little bit more integrity over the past few years than the WBC and the WBA, because those two divisions, the WBC and the WBA, have been keeping up so much nonsense that it's frustrating. The WBC, of course, giving carte blanche to so many of their champions, making mandatories wait a ridiculous amount of time, allowing champions to be inactive for years and not stripping them of the belts, ranking people extremely highly because they're former champions of the WBC when they haven't done anything in years, all this kind of carry on. The WBA have been frustrating fans by having all these multiple belts. They've got the regular belt and then the super belt and all this other stuff. Yeah, fans don't like that. The IBF and the WBO are definitely not perfect, but they're not quite as bad as the WBC and WBA, or at least over the past few years. Fans generally don't like change, and there's been 17 weight classes in boxing since the 1980s. People generally don't want any more, but because heavyweights are getting so big now, many of the sanctioning body, or a couple of the sanctioning bodies, and some fans, maybe some fighters, think that it'd actually be a good thing, because you've got these massive weight disparities between fighters in many heavyweight fights at this point. This is not like the mid-1980s where Mike Tyson at 215, 220 was fighting guys who were 6'3", but they only weighed 225. Some of the guys Mike Tyson fought in the 1980s were bigger than that. I mean, Buster Douglas, who knocked him out, was, I think, in the low 230s when they fought. And Mike Tyson was in the low 220s. So there was a 10-pound weight difference. But today, Mike Tyson, 215, 220, going up against Tyson Fury in the 270s. Anthony Joshua in the 250s. Right? Hrgovic in the 240s, 250s. Zheli Zhang in the 270s. Martin Bakole nearly 300 pounds. Right now, yeah, you could say that Mike Tyson fought some very big guys during his time, but when he was champion, he never fought guys this big. I probably shouldn't have used Mike Tyson as an example because his fans are so intense in their love for him and in their belief. They're so fanatical that they think he can move heaven and earth and do anything, right? Move mountains because he's so amazing. Prime Mike Tyson, invincible. That's the idea they like to go with. But yeah, the point I'm making is it's reasonable for some people to say that there should be a super cruiserweight division. Yeah, it's reasonable. Because again, fighters are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So to accommodate that, introducing another division, I don't think it's a horrible thing, but what the WBO president said there is that the cruiserweight division has never really been fully embraced by the public. it's never really been one of the glamour divisions. It's never been a division that, yeah, hardcore boxing fans will watch it, we'll enjoy it, but the wider public have never really been enamored with the cruiserweight division, and not just the wider public, but the fighters themselves, because it seems to be the ambition of anyone who's ever any good at cruiserweight to eventually move up to heavyweight, because that's where the big money is. You know, and the big money's there because, again, cruiserweight isn't seen as prestigious as the heavyweight division isn't viewed as being so prestigious. Whereas if you look at some of the quote unquote classic divisions, middleweight, welterweight in particular, you see fighters in those divisions reach a much higher status, a much higher profile than cruiserweight champions tend to. Again, because of this stigma of the cruiserweight division that is basically just a training ground almost for heavyweights, for smaller heavyweights to ply their trade and see if they can have some success at cruiserweight, but the end goal is always to move up to heavyweight. Yeah, so it's had this kind of stigma. It hasn't really been embraced fully by the public. And so if you introduce super cruiserweight, again, the president of the WBO, whose surname I always struggle with, he makes a good point as well, that another division like that is going to be an even more difficult sell for the public. Cruiserweight, after all these decades, still hasn't been fully embraced to the extent that the classic divisions have. Super cruiserweight, I mean, come on. So, yeah. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Are you in favor of this division or not?